Well, hello there, I'm Détroit. For some reason, these days, I'm great at starting drawings, but bad at finishing them. I have like 7 different digital painting projects I started, but that are still sitting comfortably in their folder. I have the footage for them and everything, I just kinda stopped halfway. I swear I'll turn them into cool videos eventually, but I don't know when. To remedy that, one morning I started yet another one. But for this one, the prompt is simpler, and I decided I would definitely finish it. That was 3 weeks ago. However, today I left myself no choice. I opened it and went back into it without leaving me the time to think about it at all. It is this drawing you're seeing right now. As I said, the prompt is simple. It's a mess of perspective with buildings everywhere, not necessarily making sense. You have buildings on top, to the sides and below, of course. Every face of every building is full of windows, in order to disorient you even more. At the center, I don't really know what I'm planning, but maybe a large spirally wave of light. I'll have to see when I get there. As always, when I need a point of perspective in Photoshop, I'm using the polygonal tool to create a path in the shape of a star with 99 points and no thickness. This is a perspective point that I can then use as my drawing guide with low opacity. The next step is, of course, to sketch the buildings. Sketching is important because it allows one to determine the composition. For example, drawing a building and then finding out it's badly positioned. With the sketch, you can redo it quickly without having to work out all the kinks about the perspective. That will be left to the inking step, which comes next. I'm using the same brush I always use for my inks in Photoshop. I love this brush, its texture and the pressure size parameter, which is perfect for how I draw. Inking a piece like this is definitely a test of patience. It's very long to do and straight lines are the worst to draw in this program with the normal brush. I mean, it's the point I'm making, I don't want my lines to be perfect for this drawing. I want it to remain organic with tiny imperfections. But even if I wanted to make perfect lines, Photoshop makes this hard to do with the brush. I know there are a couple shortcuts I can use though, which I did mostly for the sketch. Once you press the stylus on the canvas, you can tap Shift and move the stylus and it will remain in a straight horizontal or vertical line, depending on how you move. The Shift key can also be used to draw a line between the last 2 points of the canvas. Press the tip somewhere, then hold Shift and press the tip elsewhere and there will be a line between the two. To be honest, the exact details of how that works have always eluded me. If you know, please tell me in the comments. I'm serious. I can't work out how the thickness of said line is decided. I just know that if I don't press one of the 2 points hard enough, then the in-between line will have a weird thinness. So unless I am using a brush that has no change in size with pressure whatsoever, this shortcut is useless for me and will always bother me when I do it by mistake. To avoid it, I always have to double tap the same point before I want to draw a horizontal or vertical line. Anyway, I eventually inked the whole picture this way. For the windows of the buildings that are closest to the point of view, I used the shorthand of drawing the recess into the wall the window sits in. However, since all lines are of the same thickness no matter the foreground or background, I couldn't do it for all windows. By detailing only the foreground, your eye can assume it applies to all the rest as well. That's a quick tip for you when you're in need of simplification at scale like this. It's almost time for coloring, I think, and I'm gonna be jumping around the place with this, but I want to go back to perspective in Photoshop for a second. As I mentioned, it's always hard to draw a good perspective with a random brush because, as far as I'm aware, Photoshop doesn't have ways to make drawing guides that force the movement of the strokes. Again, I wouldn't have necessarily used one here, but for the sketch, this would have been incredible. And here, to be clear, I'm comparing Photoshop to Procreate. I love Photoshop and I love Procreate on iPad, but not for the same reasons. Procreate is very limited in what it can do, but it does have some key tools that Photoshop lack and that should, in theory, not be too hard to implement. This is a big problem in Adobe programs in general, to be fair. Procreate I love, especially for its smudge tool that I use all the time to blend colors and stuff, and for its perspective grid. You can place perspective points where you want on the canvas and it will make a grid for you. You can then turn on and off assist mode, which will force the path of the strokes along the grid. Basically, in assist drawing mode, you cannot mess up your perspective, even if you try. For sketching, this is an incredible tool and I would have loved that here. Of course, Procreate also has its problems and a lot of limitations. The thing I hate the most with Procreate is the limit imposed on the size of the files. Basically, if you want a picture with good resolution and a very large size, the program will limit the number of layers you can have. I can work with 30 or so layers, but for a couple of large poster-sized prints I wanted to make, working with only 5 or 10 layers is just not enough, and you're forced to delete all layers as you go or merge them. Anyway, I just needed to rant for a bit. It's not the topic of this video, so back to this perspective mess on screen. I decided at first on a simple orange to yellow gradient for the building. However, I wanted it to be more fitted to the building faces. So I colored together all the faces that were in similar orientations and also at a similar distance from the point of view. Once all of that was done, instead of adjusting all the colors individually, I decided to rely on a gradient map. If you don't know what a gradient map is, it allows you to pick the colors depending on the value of your layers. Here I did it with layers already colored, but imagine if I used only black and white for everything. Then I could simply map onto it a gradient so that every value of gray would correlate to a specific color. I already used the same technique in this abstract digital drawing video, which is linked in the corner, and I invite you to watch it. With gradient maps, I made it so the buildings would go more orange near the far end of the picture and more yellowish green towards the edge. Similarly, I made the windows blue and purplish. And that is essentially where my ideas for what to draw ran out. Maybe that is why I've had trouble finishing drawing so much. I run out of ideas here. How do I sublimate this picture? The last 30 minutes of this process, which you now see, were spent moving around layers, changing the background a couple dozen times, trying to change the color of the line art and so on. I had the plan of making a spirally wave of light in the middle, which I had in blue and green, then in reddish pink. I changed the opacity of the spiral, then softened the edges, but honestly I couldn't make it work. Maybe it could have worked with hard edges instead, since everything in this drawing is sharp, but then what to do with the middle bit? In terms of storytelling for this picture, I am definitely missing an element. You may be frustrated to hear that I didn't find it in the end, so I removed the wave entirely. It's okay, I'll move on to something else soon anyway, and this passes as finished for this video. I just know that there should be something either in the middle, but it would have to be big or impressive, or either somewhere to the side. I contemplated having a person behind one of the windows, or maybe turn the whole drawing really dark except for one lit window. Maybe have someone stand on the ceiling and look at the far end. I wasn't convinced. In the end, leaving the scene as it is right there isn't too bad. You don't need to know what it all means. There doesn't need to be a story to everything. The process sometimes justifies the end. For this picture, actually forcing myself to finish what I started is already a good conclusion by itself. Inking a large mess of straight lines is also somewhat therapeutic, as you enter the zone at one point and stop thinking about it. And I will leave you with that. Like the video if you want more unexplainable drawings like this, and definitely subscribe because next week will be something completely different. Find my ink portfolio on Cara at Detroit, and my other social media are here too. I'm Detroit and I'll see you around. Bye!